Humanized script. 4:11 a.m. Tampa, Florida. Ybor City Industrial Corridor. Two federal vehicles cut their headlights at the corner of a produce distribution block and rolled to a stop against the curb. 31 agents in tactical gear were already staged in two teams across a darkened loading bay. Nobody spoke above a whisper. The only sound was the hydraulic hiss of a ram being brought forward from the second vehicle, its rubber grip handle sweating in the humid November air. Two agents crouched at either side of the loading bay's shadow line, eyes fixed on the freight door. Inside that building, behind a freight door that appeared on no floor plan the city had on file, 11 young adult workers had been confined for approximately 90 days. The agents did not know all of their names yet. What they knew was the door, the hinges, and the 48 hours of compressed, sleepless work that had brought them here, to this specific address, at this specific hour, with a hydraulic ram and a warrant signed just under 4 hours earlier. This is the account of how a cargo anomaly at the Port of Tampa became one of the largest joint HSI-FBI rescue operations in the Tampa Bay Field Division's history. The Ybor Industrial Corridor sits roughly 2 miles northeast of downtown Tampa. It's not glamorous. Its blocks hold cold storage units, freight brokers, produce importers, and businesses that keep odd hours and receive regular deliveries from port. Nobody looks twice at a refrigerated truck backing into a loading dock at 3 in the morning. The sound of a diesel engine idling at 2 a.m., the clatter of a pallet jack on a steel loading plate, the orange glow of a dock lamp casting shadows across cracked asphalt, all ordinary, all designed to be unremarkable. That's the point. The building operated under the name Vargas & Sons Tropical Imports. On paper, it was a produce consolidation warehouse, one of 6 businesses connected to a network of Colombian nationals living and operating in the Tampa Bay area since at least October of 2025. The business had a valid license. It paid its warehouse lease on time, in full, by electronic transfer from a regional Florida bank. It had invoices showing inbound shipments of plantains, cassava, and cut tropical fruit from a Miami broker. It filed state sales tax returns. Every administrative check would confirm it as a legitimate small business in a light industrial zone. It also had a second room that didn't exist on any document. The false wall at the rear of the building had been constructed from standard freight door hardware, reinforced with a steel liner on the interior face, and set into a channel cut into the existing concrete floor. The construction was precise. The channel had been routed with precision tooling, the kind used for commercial flooring modification. The steel liner had been welded in sections, then painted industrial gray to match the surrounding wall. When closed, it looked like the back of a cold storage unit. It wasn't. It was a door locked from the outside with a dual-throw deadbolt set into a steel housing, mortared directly into the wall framing for approximately 90 days. The case didn't begin with the wall. It began with a cargo manifest that didn't add up. Special Agent Corin Malbec worked cargo enforcement for Homeland Security investigations out of the Port of Tampa field office. She'd been in the role for 6 years. Her job involved reviewing inbound freight documentation for anomalies, weight mismatches, misclassified commodity codes, broken chain of custody seals, broker names appearing in multiple unrelated manifests. It was methodical work. Most leads dissolved into clerical errors or redirected freight. Most of it led nowhere. On the morning of November 14, 2025, Malbec pulled routine manifest data for the week's inbound produce arrivals. She was working from a terminal in the port's freight documentation office, a low-ceilinged room that smells of printer toner and stale coffee, where overhead fluorescents buzz faintly. One broker name appeared 3 times in 5 days, all routing sealed pallets to the same commercial address in the Ybor corridor. The commodity codes were standard. The weights were within tolerance. There were temperature log attachments consistent with perishable freight, but there were no matching outbound freight logs. Not for any of the 3 deliveries. That was the anomaly. A produce consolidation warehouse receives goods and ships them. It doesn't simply receive. Inbound with no outbound meant the outbound logs were filed elsewhere, the goods were redistributed through another system, or the pallets weren't carrying produce. Malbec flagged the discrepancy in the port's internal tracking system and requested a secondary review of the broker's manifest history, going back to October. That review took 4 days. When it came back, the picture had changed. The same broker had manifested sealed pallet shipments to the Vargas & Sons address on 14 separate occasions since October 9th. Total inbound volume, approximately 42,000 pounds of declared produce. Total recorded outbound, 0. A legitimate produce warehouse moves product in days, sometimes hours. Cold chain logistics don't permit extended dwell time for perishable goods. No cold storage facility in the Tampa Bay area sits on 42,000 pounds of undistributed fruit for 6 weeks without generating a single outbound log, a single delivery receipt, a single customer invoice. The absence was complete. Malbec escalated the file to her supervisory special agent that same afternoon. The initial response was measured. HSI cargo cases involving no outbound documentation often resolve into clerical failures. Nobody wanted to spend resources on a paper chase that ended with a misfiled spreadsheet. Malbec's supervisor authorized a single welfare check and a drive-by observation, nothing more. On November 19th, a Hillsborough County deputy sheriff ran the welfare check as a routine commercial code compliance visit. He arrived at the Vargas & Sons address at 10:47 a.m. in a marked patrol unit. He carried a clipboard and a county compliance form. He knocked on the roll-up door at the front of the building. A man answered, later identified as a leaseholder associate, and allowed a brief walkthrough of the public-facing warehouse floor. Everything appeared in order. Produce pallets wrapped in standard shrink film, stacked on wooden pallets in the center bay. A temperature log board on the eastern wall showing daily readings within the expected range for tropical produce storage. A small supervisor's office in the northeast corner with a desk, a computer monitor, and stacked invoices. Standard. The deputy was 2 minutes from signing off and leaving. Then, as he walked the back wall of the warehouse, running his hand along the surface in the casual way a compliance officer checks for structural anomalies, he heard a sound. A single sharp knock. From the other side of the wall, he paused, knocked back twice against the surface with the heel of his hand. Listened. The ambient noise of the warehouse, the hum of refrigeration units, the distant sound of street traffic outside, fell silent. Then, 2 knocks. From inside. The deputy didn't breach the wall. He had no probable cause for a forced entry. He kept his expression neutral, finished his walk of the remaining floor, thanked the leaseholder associate with deliberate casualness, and returned to his cruiser. He sat in the vehicle for approximately 90 seconds before picking up his radio. Within 11 minutes, he had called his watch commander. Within the hour, that call had reached the HSI field office. Malbec had her probable cause. How close that moment came to not happening is worth considering. If the deputy had been 30 seconds faster, or if whoever was on the other side of that wall hadn't knocked at precisely the right moment, or if the deputy had been a different kind of officer, one more inclined to accept the surface reading of a tidy warehouse floor, the welfare check closes with nothing found. The paper trail on the cargo anomaly sits in a queue. Vargas & Sons continues to operate. Instead, HSI had a location, a pattern, and a sound that couldn't be explained by a produce warehouse. The next 48 hours moved fast. Malbec's supervisory chain contacted the FBI's Tampa field office on the evening of November 19th. The Bureau assigned a senior agent from its Crimes Against Persons unit, Special Agent David Restrepo, to coordinate alongside HSI. Within the first 12 hours, the two agencies had established a joint working group and were pulling every public record connected to the Vargas & Sons address and its leaseholders. Property records, state business filings, utility accounts, vehicle registrations, financial disclosures. The data was collated and cross-referenced through the night in the HSI field office's operations room, printed onto a physical link chart that covered most of one wall by morning. What they found extended the scope considerably. The 6 Colombian nationals connected to the Vargas & Sons operation held controlling or associated interests in 5 other businesses across the Tampa Bay area. A freight forwarding company in Brandon, a money services business in Hialeah that held a Florida license but operated from a Tampa address, a cleaning supply distributor in Riverview, a second produce broker operating out of a shared commercial mailbox in Ybor, and a vehicle rental company registered to an address that, on inspection, was a vacant lot on the southeastern edge of Hillsborough County. The vehicle rental company was what shifted the investigation from a cargo anomaly into something much larger. HSI financial investigators traced the vehicle rental company's registered agent back to a Miami-based logistics holding entity. That entity had been flagged in a separate DEA narcotics database entry from the previous spring, connected to a Colombian cocaine transshipment network, moving product through South Florida port infrastructure using produce import cover businesses. The DEA flag wasn't an active investigation. It was a notation made by a Miami field analyst reviewing an unrelated wire intercept, a single cross-reference in a database that might never have been queried again. But it named the same network structure, the same layered produce front model, the same sealed pallet methodology, the same pattern of inbound freight with no distribution trail. Restrepo placed the call to the DEA's Miami Field Division at 11:47 a.m. on November 20th. The DEA confirmed within 4 hours. The network behind Vargas & Sons was a transshipment cell operating under a Colombian narcotics distribution organization, actively routing cocaine and fentanyl through South Florida since at least the second quarter of 2025. Tampa wasn't the primary hub. It was a secondary consolidation point where sealed freight was held, rerouted, and repackaged before moving north and west by ground transport, using the commercial cargo van fleet registered to the vehicle rental shell company. The produce pallets were cover. The actual commodity moved in vacuum-sealed secondary containers, embedded within the pallet wrapping, positioned between layers of produce to defeat casual visual inspection. Estimated volume of narcotics transshipped through the Vargas & Sons address in the 6 weeks prior to discovery, between 60 and 80 kilograms of cocaine, and an undetermined quantity of fentanyl pressed into counterfeit pharmaceutical tablets. Street value per DEA preliminary estimate, between $4.2 and $5.8 million. That number was significant, but it wasn't the number that changed the operation's classification. The number that changed everything was 11. 11 women had been reported missing by family members and local law enforcement across Central Florida between August and November of 2025. Their ages ranged from 22 to 26. They had come from Lakeland, from Plant City, from Zephyr Hills, from Dade City, and from smaller communities in Hillsborough and Polk counties. Their disappearances were logged with local sheriff's departments and the National Crime Information Center database. None had generated an active federal investigation prior to November 19th. Before the operation moved into its final planning phase, investigators constructed what Restrepo later called the victim timeline, a chronological reconstruction of each woman's last known movements, cross-referenced against available surveillance data and the freight manifest records already in evidence. It was painstaking work, dependent on cell phone tower data obtained through emergency pen register authorizations, toll reader logs pulled under administrative subpoena, and hours of convenience store and gas station surveillance footage reviewed one frame at a time. What that reconstruction showed was a systematic pattern, not a random one. The women hadn't been taken haphazardly. They had been approached at transit points, places where a person traveling alone wouldn't generate immediate concern, where a brief conversation with a stranger wouldn't draw attention, where a vehicle pulling away from a parking lot at an odd hour would be unremarkable. Several transit points had been used more than once weeks apart, suggesting deliberate reconnaissance and calculated tolerance for risk. The agents reviewing that footage described it as watching an organization that had done this before, possibly many times, with a refined process designed to minimize exposure. One woman, a 24-year-old named Alexa Dunbar from Plant City, had last been seen on August 11th. Her family reported her missing on August 12th. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office logged her case as a voluntary absence, then reclassified it as a missing person investigation in September after her family provided evidence that her bank account, her phone, and her car had all gone inactive simultaneously. Her cell phone last pinged a tower less than a mile from the Ybor Corridor Industrial District on the evening of August 11th at 9:14 p.m. The first month she was missing, her mother called the Hillsborough Sheriff's tip line every week. By November, she hadn't received a substantive update in 7 weeks. Alexa Dunbar had been inside that building for approximately 96 days when the deputy heard the knock. The joint HSI-FBI working group cross-referenced the 11 missing person cases with the discovery of the secondary room on November 21st. The correlation was immediate. 7 of the 11 women had last been seen within a 20-mile radius of the Ybor corridor. The remaining 4 had last been seen at transit points, 2 at a Greyhound station in Lakeland, 1 at a gas station off Interstate 75 near Zephyr Hills, 1 outside a shopping center in Dade City. All of those transit points had, within subsequent months, generated commercial vehicle sightings logged by either a Florida Highway Patrol camera or a toll reader on vehicles registered to entities connected to the Vargas and Sons network. The evidence wasn't yet sufficient for a federal warrant. The deputy's report of the knock inside the wall was probative but not conclusive. A federal magistrate would need more before signing a search and rescue authorization for a forced entry into a private commercial building. Restrepo and Malbec needed more before they could deploy a ram against that door. They had less than 48 hours to get it. On the afternoon of November 21st, with the warrant application being assembled, Malbec requested that HSI's Financial Crimes Unit run an expedited review of the money services business in Hialeah. What came back in 4 hours changed the texture of the evidence considerably. The money services business had processed outgoing wire transfers to 3 foreign accounts totaling approximately $480,000 between October and mid-November, a volume wildly inconsistent with its declared transaction volume. The transaction metadata showed that the transfers had been initiated from IP addresses geolocated to the Vargas and Sons building in Ybor City. Someone inside that warehouse had been using the money services business's online transfer portal to move funds offshore repeatedly over a 6-week window. The timing of the transfers correlated precisely with the 14 inbound pallet manifests flagged in Malbec's original review. Each pallet delivery had been followed, within 24 to 48 hours, by an outbound wire transfer. The pallets weren't just cover freight. They were transaction triggers. Product arrived, funds moved. The two events were operationally linked. That correlation gave the warrant application the financial nexus it needed. The federal prosecutor reviewing the application told Restrepo it was a cleaner evidentiary package than most cases she saw after 6 months of investigation. This one had been assembled in 72 hours. The 12-hour obstacle that nearly collapsed the operational timeline before the warrant was signed deserves attention. On the evening of November 21st, HSI surveillance units positioned outside the Vargas & Sons building made an observation that changed the threat calculus. One of the 6 Colombian nationals associated with the network was observed loading 2 large plastic cargo containers into the rear of a refrigerated box truck parked at the loading dock. The containers matched the dimensions of the sealed units arriving in the inbound pallet manifests. The loading was done by hand by 2 individuals working with deliberate efficiency, without dock lighting, working under a portable LED work lamp positioned inside the truck's cargo bay, visible only as a thin band of light along the bottom seal of the roll-up door. The surveillance team couldn't determine the contents, but the movement suggested the occupants of the building may have become aware of the deputy's visit 2 days earlier and were preparing to relocate whatever was stored in the secondary room. If that relocation proceeded, the warrant application would become meaningless. Whatever, or whoever, was behind that wall would be gone. Restrepo contacted the duty AUSA at the federal courthouse in Tampa at 9:44 p.m. and requested an emergency hearing for a search and rescue warrant. The duty judge was reached at his residence. He reviewed the application summary by secure transmission. The hearing was conducted by secured video at 10:50 p.m., with Restrepo, Malbec, and the prosecutor appearing from the HSI operations room. The judge asked 8 questions. The hearing lasted 22 minutes. The warrant was signed at 12:17 a.m. on November 22nd. The operation was authorized to proceed. The window between the warrant signing and the point of no return, when the truck would have left the loading dock, was estimated at under 3 hours. The surveillance team noted that loading activity at the dock had paused sometime around midnight, possibly while the subjects waited for a driver or a specific departure window. Federal prosecutors who reviewed the file afterward noted that a delay of even 1 additional hour could have produced a materially different outcome. The operational plan had been developed in a compressed window by Restrepo and HSI tactical lead Marcus Telford, a senior agent running the field component for the Joint Task Force, who had slept a combined total of perhaps 6 hours across 2 intervals on a cot in the field office break room over the preceding 48 hours. 2 entry teams. Team 1, HSI Tactical, 6 agents. Primary breach at the false wall freight door using a hydraulic ram. Team 2, FBI, 5 agents, secondary entry through the main warehouse roll-up door to control the front and intercept any personnel attempting to exit through the primary commercial entrance. A third element, 3 U.S. Marshals Service fugitive apprehension deputies, was positioned 1 block north at the intersection of 2 industrial access roads, in 2 unmarked vehicles, with sight lines down the eastern and northern faces of the building, in case subjects exited on foot. Simultaneous arrest teams were staged at 3 secondary locations across the Tampa Bay area: the Brandon Freight Forwarding Office, where surveillance had confirmed a subject present as recently as 10 p.m., a residential address in Tampa's Seminole Heights neighborhood, where 2 additional subjects had been observed by a fixed surveillance position over the preceding 36 hours, and a second residential address in Brandon, associated with the 6th named subject. All 6 named subjects were to be taken into custody within the same operational window, preventing any communication that could compromise either the breach or the welfare of the people believed to be inside the building. The simultaneous timing wasn't optional. A single arrest at any secondary location, if it generated a phone call or a text before the others were completed, could provide the subjects inside the warehouse with a 3-minute warning. The timing problem was this: 4 of the 6 named subjects were at the 3 secondary locations. 2 were believed to be inside the Vargas & Sons building. But HSI had identified a possible 7th individual, a man appearing in 3 separate pieces of surveillance footage from the building's exterior loading dock over the preceding 10 days, always at night, always performing or supervising freight handling activity, suggesting operational familiarity with the site. His identity hadn't been confirmed through any database. His location was unknown. Telford made the call at 3:58 a.m. Proceed as planned. An unidentified 7th subject was a risk. Waiting was a larger one. At 4:11 a.m., the secondary arrest teams confirmed simultaneous ready status across all 3 external locations. 31 agents, 7 U.S. Marshals deputies, and 2 Tampa Fire Rescue medical units were pre-positioned 2 blocks east. The medical units had been staged without markings at an address 1 street removed from the operation perimeter to prevent their presence from creating visible signals. At 4:13 a.m., Team 2 entered the front of the Vargas & Sons warehouse through the main roll-up door, which hadn't been locked from the inside, a detail Telford would later note as fortunate, since a locked door would have required a secondary breach tool and added approximately 90 seconds to entry time. The warehouse floor was clear of personnel. The supervisor's office at the northeast corner held 2 men, the primary leaseholder and a second associate. Both were taken into custody without resistance within 40 seconds. One had a cell phone in his hand. He hadn't completed a call. The phone showed a recent call log with a number later identified as belonging to the 7th subject. Team 1 was already moving. The freight door at the rear of the warehouse was identified by the hinges, 4 industrial pivot hinges on the left side of what appeared to be a concrete wall panel, visible only under close examination to agents specifically briefed on their location. The hinges had been identified through thermal imaging operated by an HSI technical surveillance unit in the days preceding the operation. Telford had ordered a thermal pull from utility company records showing a non-standard heat differential along that wall's interior surface, a reading consistent with human occupancy in an enclosed space with limited ventilation. The technical unit had also identified the channel cut in the concrete floor using ground-penetrating acoustic equipment deployed during a nighttime pass of the building's exterior perimeter. Both datasets had been incorporated into the breach briefing. The RAM was positioned against the right side of the panel at 4:14 a.m. by 2 agents working in near-total darkness, guided by a single low-emission red lens flashlight. Power to the loading bay was cut at 4:15 a.m. by an HSI technical agent who had located the exterior utility access panel during pre-operational reconnaissance. The RAM engaged at 4:15 and 40 seconds. The door came off its channel in 2 strikes. The steel liner buckled on the second impact and the door swung inward on its pivot hinges, the deadbolt housing tearing free of its mortar mounting with a sound like a gunshot in the confined warehouse bay. Inside, a space approximately 30 feet wide and 60 feet deep. No windows. A portable ventilation unit on the far wall running on a generator feed, its housing vibrating with a low mechanical hum. Folding cots in 2 rows, 8 on each side with narrow aisles between them, mismatched blankets folded at the foot of each. Emergency lighting units, battery-powered, mounted at intervals along the upper wall, still functioning, casting a pale yellow wash across the space. Stacks of plastic water containers near the ventilation unit, several empty, A portable toilet screen in the far left corner. The smell of confined air and industrial cleanser, and something underneath. What agents on scene described in their reports as the smell of a space that has been closed for a very long time. 11 young women, ranging from 22 to 26 years of age. Dehydrated. Disoriented from the sudden loss of ambient light and the sharp illumination of the entry team's tactical lights cutting through the darkness. Several couldn't stand unassisted, their legs unsteady after weeks of confinement, in a space where movement was severely limited. Several shielded their eyes with their arms as tactical lights swept the room. One woman called out a name, not an agent's name, just a name, in the kind of voice that carries the quality of someone who has been waiting a very long time to hear an answer. All were alive. Alexa Dunbar was found in the second row of cots, on the left side, third from the wall. She was sitting upright when the door came in. She was holding something in her right hand. A laminated hospital wristband from a clinic visit, dated August 9th, 2 days before she was last seen. The wristband had her name, her date of birth, and a medical record number. She had kept it for 93 days in a room with no windows and no contact with anyone outside the wall. Medical teams from Tampa Fire Rescue and the pre-positioned HSI Medical Support Unit were on scene within 6 minutes of the breach, having been radioed in from their staged position the moment the door came down. Triaging each woman in sequence, and coordinating transport assignments by radio with the 2 hospital receiving teams placed on standby at Tampa General and St. Joseph's. All 11 were transported by ambulance in a staggered sequence over the next 22 minutes. Federal Victim Services personnel accompanied each transport, remaining with each woman through the intake process. The tactical discipline required to manage both the breach and the immediate welfare response simultaneously, to shift instantly from entry posture to victim assistance, without allowing either function to compromise the other, isn't something that resolves cleanly in the way incident reports describe afterward. The reports use the language of procedure. The people who were in that room describe it differently. At 4:31 a.m., the secondary arrest teams confirmed custody at all 3 external locations. 4 additional individuals taken without incident. Charges being processed. The 7th individual, the unidentified man from the surveillance footage, wasn't among them. At 4:47 a.m., a Hillsborough County Patrol unit 3 blocks from the Vargas & Sons warehouse radioed a foot pursuit in progress. A male subject had exited the building through an emergency egress door on the west face, a door that hadn't appeared in the utility floor plan Telford's team had used, set flush into an exterior panel and accessible only from inside, opening onto a narrow service alley between the warehouse and the adjacent cold storage unit. The subject ran north on foot through the Ybor city blocks, through an alley behind shuttered commercial storefronts whose steel security shutters reflected the distant glow of streetlights, and into the loading entrance of a former cigar manufacturing facility on the north side of the block. The building had been vacant for at least 2 years. Its windows were boarded. Its loading bays were chained. The U.S. Marshals fugitive team repositioned immediately, splitting their vehicles to cover the north and east approaches. 3 deputies entered the cigar factory from the loading entrance within 4 minutes of the initial radio call. 2 additional deputies covered the 2 street-facing exits. The factory's interior was a single open floor, approximately 120 feet deep, the original manufacturing equipment long removed, the space occupied by empty wooden drying frames arranged in parallel rows running from the loading entrance to the far wall. Exposed rafter beams above. Loose debris on the concrete floor, broken pallet boards, crumpled paper, scattered insulation material from a section of wall, partially demolished during the building's vacancy. The subject was located inside the factory floor, hiding in a space between two drying frame banks in the third row from the east wall, face down against the concrete, at 5:17 a.m. He was taken into custody. No weapon was recovered. No injuries to personnel. He was identified as a Colombian national not previously named in the federal indictment, holding a Florida identification card issued under a name that didn't appear in any immigration record. Federal prosecutors would later add him as the seventh defendant after fingerprint analysis confirmed his identity through an Interpol cross-reference matching a prior arrest record in Colombia from 2019. By 6 a.m. on November 22nd, all 7 subjects were in federal custody. All 11 women were receiving medical care. The federal indictment, unsealed by the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida, later that morning, charged the 7 defendants on multiple counts of conspiracy to distribute cocaine and fentanyl, federal narcotics trafficking, and additional federal counts connected to the conditions in which the 11 women had been held. The drug trafficking charges carried mandatory minimum sentences. The additional federal counts carried substantially higher maximum exposure. All 7 defendants entered not guilty pleas at their initial appearances. The cargo manifest is the piece of this case that stays with you. That 14-entry inbound log, 42,000 pounds of declared produce with 0 outbound movement over 6 weeks. In any functioning regulatory system, that anomaly should have generated a flag weeks earlier. The port tracking system logged it. The data was there. The cross-reference capability was built into the system. Nobody acted on it until Malbec pulled the weekly summary by hand on a Tuesday morning because she happened to work through her review queue before a supervisory meeting rather than after it. Looking at what this case reveals about port-level freight oversight, the infrastructure exists to catch exactly this kind of discrepancy. The data feeds are there. The manifest cross-reference capability is there. Automated systems that could flag a 14-entry inbound-only pattern in real time have existed in various forms since at least 2018. What's missing, consistently, is a human being reviewing the aggregated output at a frequency that matches the operational pace of a cell that moves on a multi-week timeline. Malbec found it in week 6. A routine weekly review would have found it in week 1. An automated threshold alert set to flag any commercial address with more than 3 inbound manifests and no corresponding outbound logs over a 30-day window would have generated a notification within the first 30 days of the Vargas & Sons operation. That's not a criticism of any individual. It's a structural observation about resource allocation at regional port enforcement offices, about the gap between the technical capacity of freight monitoring systems and the staffing levels required to review their output. It's the gap that organizations running operations like this are designed to exploit. They study the review frequency. They calibrate their operational tempo accordingly. The cell behind Vargas & Sons had been running the produce front model long enough to know that a 6-week inbound accumulation wouldn't automatically trigger an alert. They were right, until they weren't. Sentencing for the 7 defendants is pending. Federal prosecutors are seeking upward departure enhancements on the narcotics counts based on the total quantity transshipped through the Vargas & Sons location, which agents calculated at approximately 71 kilograms of cocaine and roughly 18,000 counterfeit fentanyl tablets over the 6-week operational window. Combined street value estimated at $5.4 million. The narcotics sentencing guidelines in this case, even with the enhancements being sought, do not fully account for what was found behind that wall. Federal prosecutors are working within the statutes available to them, and those carry serious weight. But the sentencing framework was designed for a drug trafficking case, and this wasn't only a drug trafficking case. The 7 defendants face the narcotics maximums, plus additional exposure, and that's appropriate. The public record should be clear about what was found in that building and what it represents. Among the items recovered from the main warehouse floor during the post-breach evidence inventory, agents found a handwritten ledger. It was in a fireproof document sleeve tucked inside a hollowed-out section of drywall behind the manifest board in the supervisor's office, concealment suggesting it had been accessed and updated regularly. The ledger documented inbound and outbound shipments but not produce. It was a logistics record for the narcotics transshipments, organized by date, volume, destination city, delivery contact code, and a column that federal investigators interpreted as a per-unit payment notation. 11 destinations were listed across 8 states. Tampa was one of 11 nodes in a distribution chain extending from South Florida to the upper Midwest. 6 of those 10 other nodes haven't been located. The investigation into the broader network remains open. That ledger and its 11 destination lines doesn't resolve cleanly even now. 7 people are in custody in Tampa. The Tampa node has been dismantled. But 10 other cities appear in that record, and federal investigators have confirmed only that the broader inquiry is ongoing. What's operating in those other locations, and whether the same conditions, the same false walls and locked freight doors and folding cots, exist in any of them, is an open question the available public record doesn't answer. The 11 women recovered from the Vargas & Sons warehouse were all identified within hours of the rescue. All were reunited with family within 72 hours of the operation. Their medical conditions, per hospital discharge documentation reviewed by Federal Victim Services, ranged from moderate dehydration and vitamin deficiency to conditions requiring several days of inpatient care. 2 required treatment for respiratory issues, consistent with prolonged exposure to inadequate ventilation. All 11 were connected with Federal Victim Assistance Services, including trauma-specialized counseling referrals coordinated through the Middle District's Victim Witness Assistance Program. Alexa Dunbar was discharged from Tampa General Hospital on November 25, 2025. Her family drove from Plant City to pick her up. Her mother, who had been calling the Hillsborough Sheriff's tip line every week since August, was notified by a Federal Victim Services coordinator at 5:42 a.m. on November 22, approximately 26 minutes after the rescue was complete, and all 11 women had been confirmed alive. The notification call lasted 11 minutes. The asset forfeiture proceedings connected to the case remain ongoing. Federal investigators have traced approximately $1.3 million in proceeds through the money services business and the freight forwarding company to accounts held in 3 jurisdictions. Approximately $800,000 in additional proceeds hasn't been located. The vehicle fleet connected to the vehicle rental company, 11 cargo vans registered to Florida commercial addresses, was partially seized at the time of the operation. 3 of the 11 vans weren't located at the time of the arrests and remain outstanding. Federal investigators believe at least one of the 3 missing vans may have been in transit between Tampa and one of the destination cities listed in the ledger at the time of the operation. The 7 defendants are held without bail in federal custody pending